All right, so welcome everyone to the extension strategizing for the fourth industrial revolution and the first panel discussion on platforms, ecosystems and innovation. So today we have 4 experts on the topic: Carmelo Cennamo from Copenhagen Business School, Panos Konstantinidis from University of Manchester, Robin Gustafsson from Aalto University, and Joost Rietveld from University College London. So what we'll do is first, all 4 panelists will present their own views and perspectives on digital platforms. Those talking about how to successfully operate the platform business model. Then Robin will talk about the economic growth and innovation challenges. Panos will talk about data openness and platform expansion. And then Carmelo will talk about the implications of the platform identity concept. So, and Joost, you can start.
Great. Okay. Let me get set up here. Can you hear me, Joa?
Yep.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to be part of this exciting SMS extension. My name is Joost Rietveld, and I'm an assistant professor in strategy at the UCL School of Management at University College London. So my talk today will be brief and introductory. I will attempt to identify how platforms are different and what it takes to successfully manage the platform business model. For those of you who are deep in the literature, I think this will be largely a summary of what you likely already know. For those of you less familiar with the topic, this may be a good introduction. After I briefly explain what a platform is and why it is important to study platforms, I will identify 4 elements of successfully managing the platform business model. And these findings are based on an extensive and interdisciplinary review of the literature on platform competition that I conducted together with Melissa Schilling at NYU Stern. The paper is forthcoming in the review issue of the Journal of Management, but you can already grab a preprint from SSRN if you're interested. So 2 or multi-sided platforms facilitate transactions and govern interactions between 2 or more distinct customer groups who are connected via an indirect network effect. Thus, to qualify as a platform, a firm must have 2 or more distinct customer groups that value each other's presence on the platform, but experience difficulties either finding each other or letting the market decide on a price. Platforms therefore create value by reducing search cost, or by reducing transaction costs, or by doing both. Examples include Apple's iOS App Store, where app developers are complementers and iPhone users are end users, and Facebook, where advertisers are complementers and users like you and me are the end users. In all these cases, the platform connects 2 sides of the market and makes sure that they can transact with each other via the platform. And so one implication is that many platforms are rather useless without both sides of the market joining. Platforms are an important topic to study because many firms today operate the platform business model. For example, more than 70% of all unicorns, so startups valued at over $1 billion or more, operate the platform business model. And the GAFAs of the world largely determine how we interact with other people and businesses. And moreover, there's increasing interest from policymakers in these firms as concerns over anti-competitive behavior are mounting. So in short, there's a lot to do about platforms nowadays. The literature actually dates back to the 1980s, when economic scholars realized that economics of multi-sided platform markets differ from those in more traditional markets. And besides economics, platform competition has increasingly received attention from scholars in management and organization, information systems, and marketing. So Melissa and I identified 333 articles published on the topic of platform competition. And our literature review uncovers 4 conceptual themes of interest to platform competition scholars and practitioners. These themes reflect the various issues that platform sponsors, the firms commercializing platforms, must take into account. And they also point towards the factors for successfully managing the platform business model. So I will next briefly discuss these four elements. The first theme we identified is also the earliest theme in the literature. It looks at how network effects between complementers and end users can create winner-take-all dynamics and have implications for the platform's pricing. So on the one hand, platforms face a chicken or the egg problem. Without complementers, such as game developers, end users, such as gamers, won't be interested in joining a platform, and the reverse is also true. Platforms must thus try to get both customer groups on board, without there being a particularly strong incentive for either side to do so. On the other hand, however, in the presence of strong network effects, a platform that enters the market early can end up dominating the entire market if it manages to attain some early success. Network effects can lock users in and prevent them from joining a competing platform, even if that platform is objectively better. This creates implications for pricing on both sides of the market. Network effects create a strong incentive to subsidize one side of the market, usually the side with the least interest in having users on the other side join, and then monetize the other side. Think of Facebook, where users can join and use the platform free of charge, while advertisers are charged a hefty fee. Platforms are also incentivized to engage in penetration pricing. By incurring losses early in the platform's life, the platform increases its chances of attracting users and becoming dominant, which will likely pay itself back later in the platform's life when the platform can safely increase its prices without loss of users. Generally, for greater specialization among firms. If one firm develops the operating system, for example, and thousands of smaller other firms develop software functionality, all firms in the ecosystem can focus on what they do best. That said, we do see increasingly that platforms broaden their scope of activities, especially when they become more dominant. Platform firms might want to increase their scope if certain functionality poses a bottleneck or is particularly valued by end users. Microsoft did this when it felt that third-party internet browsers such as Netscape were becoming too valuable. It introduced Internet Explorer to counter this concern. Platforms can also use scope decisions to boost the success of the overall ecosystem. In a platform's life, when few complementers see value in joining a platform, the platform might decide to produce some of its own complements to jumpstart the ecosystem and attract end users. Microsoft also did this with its Xbox video game console. Prior to entering the market, it acquired a number of game developers such as Bungie to ensure that it had a sufficient number of launch games available that were also unique to the Xbox brand. Finally, platforms should be flexible in their boundaries over time. Platforms must often be careful not to impede complementers' market space, especially in the early stages of the platform's life when the platform's bargaining position is relatively weak. Later, however, platforms act a bit more bullish, decide to offer an increasing amount of complement functionality themselves. Apple famously did this with various third-party app IDs such as Flashlight and even fertility trackers. These were originally offered by external app developers, but at some point Apple decided it was better to start offering them as part of the iOS operating system. Third, platforms must realize and act on the notion that more of complementers and end users isn't necessarily always better. There exist important differences between complementers and end users that the platform should take into account, as these differences can affect the strength of network effects. On the complementer side, for example, research has shown time and again that the platform owners should focus not just on getting complements to join, but rather on attracting high-quality complements that are exclusive to the platform, and complements that are considered superstars or blockbusters. On the end user side, there also exist important differences that affect the attractiveness of the overall ecosystem and which complements are most likely to perform well. My own research has shown that early adopters of a platform search differently and have different preferences for complements than late adopters of a platform. And this influences which complements are likely to sell well, but also how the value created in the ecosystem will be distributed across individual complementers. Research has further shown that when end users are tightly clustered, for example, because they live nearby or have strong shared interests, network effects tend to be stronger. And this is, for example, likely why Facebook started out as having as a yearbook specifically for Harvard students, because that network was much more dense than if it would have broadened up from the get-go. The fourth and final theme is also the most recent theme to emerge from the literature on platform competition. It looks at how platforms set rules to govern and orchestrate their ecosystems. And just to be clear, some of the things that I covered earlier, such as pricing, vertical integration, and attracting the right types of users, all fall under the notion of platform governance. It's only recently, however, that researchers started to group these under the umbrella of platform governance. In deciding on such rules, the platform owner must often make challenging trade-offs. Some rules might benefit the platform sponsor more than it does complementers. While this may be good in the short term, it can harm the ecosystem's chances of survival in the long run. For example, Apple's integration of third-party app functionality in the iOS operating system, including Flight, as I just discussed earlier. If Apple does this too extensively, Apple developers may decide to leave the platform. Platforms can also steer the ecosystem and reward complementers by engaging in selective promotion of complements. Examples of this include Kickstarter's Projects We Love, Apple's Editor's Pick, and eBay's badges for top-rated sellers. Such selective promotion brings prominence to the promoted complement or complementer. It brings increased demand from end users, and it can also send a powerful signal about which products or product categories the platform deems of strategic importance. All right, so while we already know a lot about platforms and why most platforms fail and only some succeed, there's still a lot to learn. We identified several areas for future research, some of which that are listed here. Generally, we need more interdisciplinary research, more studies that pull data from multiple empirical contexts, more qualitative research, greater engagement with existing management theories, and less research on apps and video games. And I say that tongue in cheek. We also identify several opportunities for future research within each of these themes. In the first theme, it would be great if scholars develop dynamic models for platform pricing that take into account network effects in the platform's market position. It will also be good to identify strategies for dethroning digital dominance. In the second theme, we need much more clarity on the effects of platforms competing with complementers and their boundary conditions. Moreover, platforms' horizontal scope has been largely neglected so far. In the third theme, we need a better understanding if platforms can actually design for network effects. So network effects are typically assumed to exist at the market level, but we expect that product features and design can actually affect the scope of network effects. Global strategy scholars should also look at complementers' launch strategies across geographical markets and their effects on performance. And finally, in the fourth theme, it would be good if we could zoom out and apply a more dynamic or holistic perspective on platform governance. Also, it's becoming increasingly clear that platforms aren't all gravy, so we should proactively look into the dark side of platforms. All right, so as noted at the top of my presentation, these findings are based on an extensive literature review that is now forthcoming in the Journal of Management. You can grab a preprint from SSRN. We also created a companion website where you can browse all the papers included in the literature review, and you inspect various data visualizations, such as this one here, that shows how the papers are distributed across the four themes. And I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Joost. That's a very interesting overview of the topic, and a great, and some of the questions that you raised there in the end we'll probably end up discussing a little bit in the Q&A as well. So the next up is Robin. Robin, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Juha. Can you now see my slide?
Yes.
Right. You see it well?
Yeah, well, yeah. We also see the tools bar, but I guess that's fine.
Tools bar. Okay, so
it's not as a presentation, but I think it's fine. Like, yeah, now it looks. Now it's.
Yeah. Sorry, it has some challenge with my screen. Anyway, if you see it well. All right. So thank you a lot. My name is Robin Gustafsson. I'm an associate professor at Aalto University, Industrial Engineering and Management, and my talk will address platform economic growth and innovation challenges. And Jost presented a paper that was published. This is not a paper that is published. This is ongoing work we are working on currently with two researchers, Eero Aalto and Niko Lipiainen from my team. So I want to start, I think, with like used to shortly just define what I mean with platform economy, while Jost focused on addressing what platforms are, and they are closely related. But with platform economy, I mean we refer to an expanding new economic model in which market transactions and innovations of a variety of products and services are organized around a digital platform. And key characteristics of a platform economy are that there are constantly occurring real-time interactions, transactions, and innovation activities on the platform between one or several sides of the platform participants, such as users and third-party producers. And finally, that the platform encompasses several building blocks, which is important in this regard with regards to the economic growth and innovation challenges, and those include open source code, tools, data, applications, services, and marketplaces for new products and services. So with this talk, I want to emphasize that platform economy has these unique characteristics in comparison to the previous organizing of economic activities, which are about digital goods, network effects. There are boundary resources, these tools like application program interfaces, open source licenses, standard development toolkits, and then direct interactions and peer production, which is distinct for the platform economy. And they cause growth, development, and innovation challenges, which, depending on the sector, have larger or smaller economic and social value implication in terms of welfare loss. And so my argument here is that there are requirements for updating our innovation and public policy with regards to those type of growth, development, and innovation challenges that are out there. And I will go through three of these types of growth, development, and innovation challenges we've been kind of centering on, and I would really like also your inputs and your comments on them. So the first one relates to network externality threshold. So this is a challenge that has antecedents from winner-take-all outcomes in a platform economic context, for a platform business. Also that there are participation thresholds in the beginning of setting up a platform, like to attract users and producers to and complementors to the platform. Thirdly, that there is certainly high upfront investment in digital goods and capabilities. And we know that from scaling up of platform business of many kinds, like, for example, the food delivery type of platform providers like Volt or Fodora, where in the initial stage, kind of their investments to gain the network externalities going has been quite high, and they are growing exponentially with the increase of, expanding their growth. So there are some high upfront investments in digital goods and capabilities. And of course, there is this uncertainty in value creation models, and these might be kind of accentuated, for example, even more in healthcare sector, in educational services, but I will also come back to those a bit later on here. But these cause the type of failure, what we call market failure, I would say, they cause failures in terms of that there are certain players already in the platform economic setting who has market power, and which makes it hard for any newcomer to come into the market. So they distort the market in that way. The other type of failure is kind of imperfect information. So this is kind of a classical type of market failure, imperfect information, for example, in terms of traditional market failure when with regards to internationalization of firms, when you don't know about the other country you are going to, and that's why countries are supporting firms from their country to go to another with regards to internationalization subsidies. So there are imperfect information in terms of operating in different markets, but here equally there are imperfect information with regards to how the platform business will operate. So it's much more a piloting activity where you search for the type of operating model, and it's in that way also a kind of market failure. The third type of failure we identify is risk aversion. So there are certainly, with regards to all of these antecedents, sunk costs related to initial investments in platform business, and which this means that it leads to less than potential platform economic development. The second challenge we identify is the failure to establish digital public goods. And you may ask what we mean by digital public goods. So they are kind of digital infrastructure, open software code. They are digital interfaces. They are open data. So for example, there are examples of digital goods can be also considered in terms of educational solutions. So educational material for young children, or healthcare data. So example of a current digital good that is in place in Finland is that healthcare data is stored in a central repository that is kept by and controlled by the government, but it's kind of a digital public good in that way. Equally, there can be digital good characteristic with regards to mobility data or person data. So setup of public goods is challenged. There is underinvestment in digital public goods due to three antecedents. So imperfect price mechanism reflect the value from public goods, digital public goods, like for example, the healthcare data interfaces that would help us get down the healthcare costs within a country setting or within a region. There are high upfront investments in digital public goods. And finally, there is this non-excludability, which is certainly a central element of any kind of public good, like we have had the railroad networks previously as public goods, so or streets as public good. So there is non-excludability, and there is hard challenge to kind of find a way to get a price mechanism to reflect kind of the that you would get back those investments made. So there is a type of failure, kind of an externality failure here, the establishment of public goods. The third type of challenge, or which we identify inefficient data markets, which you probably are really well aware of, that there are these unbalanced data reserves. So some players like Google or Facebook are increasingly controlling a large set of data, which again make it challenging for newcomers to set up business, platform business with regards to that kind of data that they already have, and also to gain users to also kind of give again out their data through a new kind of application. There is lack of shared standard and ownership frameworks, which is causing inefficient data markets. And there is the third challenge of valuation difficulties. So the valuation of data in itself is really hard, and especially in beforehand that data is used, or that data how it's used in innovative way. So this type of antecedents cause failures in terms of that there is market power by some actors, there is fragmented ownership of data, there are high transaction costs, and there's this imperfect information, and there is externalities that are not taking place due to that. Data access difficulties, it creates an underinvestment in sharing data. So I will end my presentation by discussing shortly some of the policy implications that comes out from this type of analyzing how different sectors might be challenged in terms of economic growth and innovation challenges within that sector in terms of developing the platform market. So one thing that we think it could be interesting, which this points to, is that one could go from so-called permissions to more accountability in data sharing. So we see in these discussions and developments that we have been working on with different sectors that brokers and encryptions could be ways of organizing and kind of mitigating those failures that we identified in data markets. Another thing is that re-regulating the digital economy or the platform economy requires going from silos to cross-administration in terms of really collaborating in terms of how to regulate various industries and various sectors, because platforms, of course, operate across industries much also. There are novel types of interventions and measures in innovation policy needed, and we also see that there is an arising question about technology neutrality versus politicization of digital technologies, which relates to regulating platform economy. So I will end with this talk with these points here. Looking forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Robin, for a great overview of some of the broader challenges that I'm sure we'll have some discussion of at the end. Let's next have Panos talk about data openness. Panos, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Juha, and thank you for inviting me to the panel. I will, in fact, touch on some of the issues that both Just and Robin mentioned. So, Robin, can you stop sharing so I can share my screen? Thank you. Okay, let me just start. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, that is great.
Okay, so what I want to talk about is platform openness strategies and focus in particular on data. So I'll just briefly describe some of the literature on platform openness just to set the scene, and then move on to a new phenomenon that we're currently exploring in a working paper with Carmelo. So digital platforms can open up in two ways. Platform firms can either grant access to peripheral components to third-party complementers through API or other boundary resources, or they could provide access to core components of the platform through open source licensing. And this is something that has been said over and again in the literature. So the first type of openness generates opportunities for complementary innovation on the platform, and of course the platform firm can leverage these innovation spillovers to target end users through more enhanced joint value with the complementers, as in the case of the Apple Store. And then the second type of openness generates opportunities for forking. This is drawing on Robin's work with some of his colleagues in a recent paper, where they talk about forking as a process of replicating the core platform functionalities to create platforms. So I think the different versions of Android OS found on Samsung, Google, Xiaomi phones, etc. So this strategic forfeiture of IP rights can enable a platform to penetrate and capture the market while recovering their costs elsewhere. So Google does it with advertising, for instance. So type 1 and type 2 access is illustrated here in relation to Android's architecture. So you see the peripheral components, or the components that are offered to the complementers, versus the core components, and the two types of openness. And we argue that there's a new type of access, what can be called type 3, to data and data orchestration. So we all know that Google originally provided both type 1 and type 2 access to the Android platform, and while it achieved great penetration and capture of the mobile market, it struggled to capture much value, as much of the Android architecture was developed on open source licenses. And therefore, Google did not operate or did not capture some of the value because, like Apple did on a revenue share model, because most of it was on open license, open source licenses. And then since 2012, Google implemented a similar or the same revenue share model, 30-70% for all apps on the Google Play Store. But more importantly, it implemented Google Play as a proprietary set of APIs controlling how resources were copied and shared on the platform. And these set of APIs facilitate a more frequent update on individual apps, and also enable more process and gatekeeping control over third-party complementers. So just linking to some of the things that you mentioned in terms of governance and pricing. Now, also what's going on is that device manufacturers are also controlled with these set of APIs. So, you know, critical apps like Google Play, Chrome, Google Search, Google Maps are implemented on any devices, irrespective of what the device manufacturers do on top of that. So even though they have tried to add their own core components, so for instance, Samsung included a separate user account system, it included a separate app store, but Google Play is still there, and a lot of these proprietary APIs are still there. So the main difference between type 3 access and the other two types is that the platform owner does not just grant access to third-party complementers, it also grants itself access to third-party complements data on users, right? So the key critical point is that there's a difference between open API and proprietary API. With open API, everyone gets access to all the data, or at least they do in principle. But with proprietary API, the proprietor controls which data is accessed and exchanged. The point is that exactly because apps require the API to run smoothly and integrate with other systems, the proprietary API is a Trojan horse, essentially. third-party apps will never be damaged in any way. On the contrary, they will run more smoothly. But at the same time, the platform owner grants itself access, right? Gets access to all the user data that is being collected on those apps. So here's an interesting figure provided by Google that explains how the Google Play services run as a set of API, which is essentially a background service in the Android OS, and each app interacts with the background service through the client library, and the service carries out a number of actions on behalf of the app. So Google promotes this as a service provided to third-party complementers so that their app can take advantage of the latest features from Google, such as Maps, Cast, and many more. And they get these automatic updates through application packages or APK through the Google Play Store, independent of the device manufacturer systems updates. Now, but at the same time, Google Play is granted permissions to a wide range of user data. So you can see here again. This is from one of the developers' websites that explains the kinds of permissions that these proprietary API get from messages, personal info, location, calls. So what are the implications of all this for platform strategy? Well, the key argument we put forward in the working paper with Carmelo is that data orchestration is the new coordination mechanism. So what this means is that a platform that grants itself type 3 access through proprietary API can achieve data-enabled learning on both the third-party complementers and the users of those complements. So a platform can learn from one customer and not only improve the app and the service for that particular customer, but also for other customers. So when combining across within user learning, right? So within the same user, but also across users, the platform owner can generate what is called data-driven network effects by selecting relevant data and algorithms for specific services and specific user groups. So in other words, the platform owner can start to address the coordination problem of matching demand and supply through data. And the consequence of these first two mechanisms is that the platform owner can start to selectively promote its own apps and those of preferred complementers. So platforms can start to leverage the data to learn about the popular apps and enter with their own services, or to redirect innovation of the different complementers towards specific markets, right? So this is in an attempt to increase overall value for users, but at the same time, of course, they are creating conditions for fair competition. I think this is something that Joost mentions in one of his papers, and we think that big people are in a better position to do this because they have all the infrastructure and the data capabilities to essentially force the proprietary set of APIs on different devices and take control of that data, all in the name of seamless integration of services. So obviously, I think this is an area that requires further research, and it does touch on some of the issues that Robin mentioned earlier about policy issues, and also I think in one of the panels that Carmelo was hosting yesterday, there was a lot of discussion around how do we regulate and how do we break up, for instance, the big tech platforms, or do we regulate in such a way that we don't break the value co-creation process, but at the same time we don't let this data orchestration to become a monopoly, right? I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Panos, for quite interesting insight into data openness and what companies like Google are doing with that. So we finished off with Carmelo talking about the platform identity concept. So Carmelo, stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Do you see the screen, I guess?
Yep.
Fantastic. All right, so thanks for having me join on the panel as one of the speakers. Now, coming last into the into the list here comes with pro and cons. Now, on the pro side, I don't have to obviously go over what has been already explained. So the stage has been laid out. On the cons, what else can I bring or discuss? Also because Panos already mentioned some of the ideas we are trying to develop and focus. What I will try to bring to the discussion here is something that I believe we are sort of missing into the picture because we are becoming obsessed with understanding, obviously, the specific dynamics and mechanisms that are powering this, platforms and ecosystems, and therefore we just tend to focus and stick on them, right? And we speak about the platform economy, the ecosystem value, et cetera, but we are slightly forgetting an important element of it. These things do not exist, okay? Or at least they do not exist on their own, do not stand on their own. They are powered by somebody. This somebody is the firm. So in most of the cases, right, there's one central hub firm that design, manage, runs this stuff, right? So unless we don't, we don't understand what is behind the scene here, running the show, I guess that we also miss a little bit of what's on the show. Okay, so let me go back to this, right? I'm gonna try basically just to see if I can bring some points here to the discussion, right? And then I go and I close back with some of the work that this relates. Now, and if I can operate the slides, okay. Now, just right, I mean, what are ecosystems? And it's been already said, right, in different sources here, but at the higher level of abstractions, they're just new ways of dealing with externalities problems, right? In particular, if we talk about the ecosystems, the kind of externalities problems we are concerned with, they are the one that deal, with complementarities of the co-specialized form, right? So we're not just interested with coordinating, demand and supply in a way that, the market then, doesn't fail. And so we can actually build a proper market between products, and consumption. But here we deal with other specific problems that have to do with making the products for the market in the first place, right? So that is what basically ecosystems are all about, right? And most of them are in productions, and this is, for instance, the idea of the innovation bottlenecks that has been early put forth by Ron and Raul, right? But you also have now issues in consumption, right? Because then you need to guarantee compatibility of the different products that are produced by external and diverse firms. And therefore, this compatibility comes from the fact that, the products can't be mutually adjusting to themselves, right? So you also need to guarantee that. So there is some level of co-specializations that's happening there. And as an ecosystem orchestrator, that's what you try to do, right? So you try basically to enable multiple parties or actors to combine their own products and service into become an integrated solution for the customer. So essentially, you configure choices for the customer, right? Now, the only thing is that now as a firm, powering an ecosystem, you're not doing anymore all of that internally as it used to be in the past. So designing already integrated products, right, with an end value for the customer, but you're now unpacking part of it by connecting and allow others to build, other solutions. So this we know, but we start basically understanding what ecosystems are and what platforms do. But our firms actually use an ecosystem to do this. I mean, to build, efficiency at the system level so that, they help everybody out there, become more efficient, bring down the transaction cost, et cetera, et cetera. So all the good and, happy stuff that we list. I don't quite think so, right? That's part of the job, right? I mean, that's part of the job. And that's part of the value that comes from this, and the reason why many parties and actors connect to them. But it's not essentially the reason why a specific firm, name it Google, Apple, or Amazon, does it. I mean, I bet that if you ask Apple, what do they do, it will not tell you, I'm building an efficient platform to connect, users and developers so that they can transact and be happy. Apple never wanted that, right? I mean, they wanted to be close. So that was an accident on the way of building value, right? So I think that we need to go a little bit back, right, to some of the old questions. What's the value of a product to consumers? And let me take a famous platform that you must be familiar with, and I'm particularly attached to. It's called Italy, and that's producing lots of innovations. And guess what? I mean, most of this innovation is open innovation, by the way. So you can use it, consume, without paying royalties to this platform, and you don't have need particular membership to go there, right? And as you can see here, just take one of the products that this country produce, right? It's pasta, right? You got a lot of variety there, so plenty of options. This is the kind of things that we all understand. But this is valuable, particularly, I guess, to those knowledgeable with these items, right? I mean, what I see here is a bunch of different varieties. And I think that, many of you, or at least, those not accustomed or not used to the Italian, cuisine, they just see macaroni, right? It's just one standardized product there. So the question is, how do you sell one of the specific, specialties of this, which is one kind of variety, to consumers for the right price that they should be, sold when everybody else just see macaroni, right? So you're trying to sell variety, but everybody else is in macaroni. So this is a kind of, the market failure that we were discussing before, right? Now, I don't know if you are familiar with this, but if you were, at the academy the last time that we were all allowed to have a proper interaction, right? So we probably went through the Italy store in Boston to get your coffee. This is the one in Milan. Now, Italy is, it's a sort of platform. It's a food store, a sort of platform, but it's not really a platform because it doesn't just have multiple shops inside, that they can sell you a variety of food. It actually structures this in a particular way, and it allows only particular stores inside and only particular products. And what do they do? It's basically building a full concept to educate the customer to the right value of the products that they sell. So they're trying to solve the market failure, but not the market failure for food in general, but they try to solve the market failure for Italian food of local specialties. So you won't find here, the mass market brands for a reason, because that's not what they sell. And that's not what they conceive as Italian food, right? So they build all this, idea around this concept. And how do they do this? Well, there are a bunch of ways of doing this, and they're introducing now new services, right? And most of the new and innovation that comes from this, it comes, on the right side of the screen here, right? So you see edutainment there. So they're now building, or they build already, they have in Bologna, a huge kind of sort of Disneyland resort for food, right? Where you can go and visit it and learn, of the different kind of things. So they're trying basically to educate, one side of the market as a way to provide value for the other side of the market, which are, the producers of this higher specialties, products. And they're building, all things around that. Now, what we see as customers in the store is just the end of this process. But what they're trying to do is solving different problems of information, right? This is fundamentally an information problem. And externalities, as we know, it's all fundamentally an information problem. And the way you gain power in the market, it's by controlling information, relevant, critical information, right? So the power, most of the power that comes in the market, we understand it's from information asymmetry issues that are both cause of, market failure. On the other hand, they actually drive value and lead value, to some of the firms. And that's where the thing becomes really interesting when it comes to platforms and ecosystems, because now these are new, new ways of gaining access to relevant information, channeling that information has been, discussed by panels recently, and use that information to drive value in a specific ways and towards, specific trajectories. And now the way that you do this, it's then going to produce value for the company. So it's not by simply building the most efficient or open system out there, but it depends on what are the ultimate objectives of the company that powers this system. And so particularly, one company may decide to design and structure the interactions within a system because they want to drive those interactions. They want, to drive value in one particular directions and not in another, and likely towards their own service, right? Now, we're speaking about ecosystems, and this is a note that I want to make because I like it, but I think that, it brings back again this point. We speak about ecosystem as, this new thing in town. Well, I discovered that, I rediscovered this, that it's not that new. And, at least about 700 years ago, they were already attempting to build ecosystems. So this is basically the one representations of what used to be, the inter-industry structures of the Florentine businessman. And this is particular one businessman who's called Dattini, who's, by the way, also the one that invented the accounting system, right? So they and they invented it for a particular reason, because they had to account for the exchange between the different firms. He started controlling, right? So now the name that they gave to this in an Italian book by an historian studying this Renaissance time, right, in Florence, it's Sistema di Impresa, which translates like enterprise system or system of enterprise or system of companies. Guess what? I mean, it's the first term of ecosystem. And the way and why we had ecosystem at that time, because at that time we had guilds, right? If you were born to do just domestic bank, you were born just to trade on wool, right, and do other stuff. But there were some of these new businessmen that basically got some contacts through the different guilds, through marriage and other social networks that were started exploring and exploiting information brokering and information asymmetry, and they start connecting the different business of the different guilds. And that's how they started then, becoming big and, and dominant, not just in Italy, but across Europe. So it was essentially a way to control information that allowed them to build, multiple businesses, right? Multiple companies connected. So where does this bring, right? So this was in late 1300s. Then, of course, I mean, this translated into a different type of companies, because they were, lots of this were internalized within the companies because it was more efficient for reasons of scale. But now that we are back with technologies such as digital that allow us to have that scale and even, larger scale outside the company, we're back to this original, idea of systems of enterprise or collective enterprise. Now, the question is, are we sticking to just one specific configurations as, a raw model? I think that the idea is completely wrong, right? So we should look not just at what is the vertical axis here. This is, drawn from a paper, published in AMP. But, where we have the standard connotations of platforms, right? You have, the different sides, and therefore, the scales is what drives here. But, I'm trying to portray also the view that you have to look also the choice that you make in terms of the particular design of the architecture, the technological architectures, and the market scope, because that defines what really is the identity of the platforms or platform-based ecosystems, which is defined by the firm that runs this. So Apple is defining the system in a particular way that is totally distinct from how Google is designed the system. And although we have platform competition between these two, the way that the ecosystem is built is different because the identity of the firm that is behind this is different, and because the business model is different out there. So they want to shape value in a particular way, in a way that is consistent with the firm. Now, if we understand this, we can start maybe playing, how the new competitive dynamics happen, because we can start looking not of the particular features of the platforms A versus platform V or ecosystem A versus ecosystem B, but we're going to look at the identity domain of those ecosystems that those ecosystems reflect, that has originated basically to the companies that power them. And we can start, understanding whether, a company is going in one direction or the other, wants to enter one domain or the other, compete directly on a differentiated way, by just looking at this identity domain overlap, right? I mean, that exists, or separate identity domain between the firms. So, and I think that I'm stopping here, but what I believe, and one of the reasons I believe why data are becoming particular, important and also critical for the discussions at the different stages, is because simply there's nothing new there. It's simply, how business has been operating forever. It's the control of the information. What is now new is that this is at the level of scale and power of control that we have never seen, because now the technology that we have today allows single companies to have access to a lot of information that is very highly relevant and can be controlled by one organization. And a platform and ecosystems are just tools to do that. I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Carmelo. Nicely going beyond the discussion of digital platforms to bring a bit more big picture understanding of our discussion of ecosystems and platforms. So now it's time for our Q&A, and I guess all of the panelists have their videos on again. So you can use the raise hand function for questions. Maybe as the moderator panelist, I'll use my right to ask the first question on all of the panelists. So what would you think, which sectors or fields will be most transformed by digital platforms, let's say in the near future or in the 10-year timescale? Carmelo, do you want to start?
Yes. The public sector. So I have, one reason why that is the case, and one reason why that will never happen. Now, the reason why this is the case is because, this is the sector. I mean, it's not the sector, but I mean, the types of goods, right? So I like to speak about goods of public utility rather than public goods. So it's the one where we basically have all the issues that, platforms are entitled basically to solve, and also the benefits of it, right? I mean, so you can actually scale, one single infrastructures for allowing to a multitude of specialized services that address different needs, and therefore, that's basically great for a type of the type of problems that we have with the public sector, right? I mean, there is one that is under our eyes, which is the health, right, sector, and all the troubles that we have right now. It's, the coronavirus is probably is in its essence, right, the way it is managed across the government is a problem of organizational design. And now I get to the second, so it's easy to fix. The problem is that, if you were to, give this to a couple of good platform managers, they will fix it in few seconds. And now I come to the second part, right? Why this is not going to happen? Unfortunately, because the public sector is run by politicians. And now, because we have politicians, right, I mean, the political agenda gets into the play, and therefore, power control over parts and pieces of the systems would be in the hands of people that do not want to release this, you know, to the organizational part.
Yep. All right, and Robin has something to continue here, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Juha. I think this is an interesting question, and Carmelo, yes, you're perfectly right that it's the public sector which is now probably the most interesting one to follow. But I will give you some points on it. I think it's different from different countries, of course, but first of all, I would say so that this, how it will develop in terms of healthcare sector or education sector or other type of services that cities or municipalities are currently asked to provide. I think first of all, healthcare sector. Let's start with that one because you also mentioned that, Carmelo. So there is already quite advanced kind of integration of healthcare data that has established in many countries, like in Finland or in Canada or and so forth. So there is joint repositories of that healthcare data, and which is allowing new kind of services like distant doctors and so forth to establish. I think this field is really already developing well. There are incentives because there is also a lot of private activities here included. But then we have the education sector, which is highly interesting actually, especially for the younger people. I think our universities are already going through that disruption and will go through. But I think that we are lacking kind of a joint infrastructure for the education sector in terms of educational kind of tools that could be available to every citizen, which would allow education for anybody that has certain challenges with education or learning and so forth to be adapted to their needs. And also, of course, we should think of education materials as public goods. So this is one concern. So we are lacking interfaces there. So that will be a challenge actually to develop. There will be efforts. And the third one is collaboration between, I think, municipalities and cities in organizing, you know, under increasing economic pressures, their activities with regards to their services that they are needing to supply. In Finland, that is ongoing already. That transition is currently happening, but there is a lot of challenges. So I stop here. I'll let the others come in.
Yep. Panos or Joost, do you have perspectives on this?
Yes, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure if this is the most immediate sector or the most affected sector, but one industry that came to mind is the industry for cultural goods, and I'll give 3 examples. This market tends to be fairly localized, but increasingly not so anymore, right? So we tend to see artists of art, pieces of art that tend to be pretty highly valued, auctioning off sections of their art to bidders in different countries via kind of blockchain structures, or allowing end users to have a digital version of that art in their home while the original piece sits somewhere. A second example in that is kind of the market for resale goods. So concert tickets are increasingly being offered via platforms that operate as typical two-sided markets, and also kind of collector's items of certain pieces of music or clothing or you name it. And then thirdly, I think a lot of high-profile brands, and this is also partly driven by, I would say, the corona pandemic, are creating platforms, not necessarily two-sided platforms, but platforms for speaking to their end customers, for creating a culture around their products, and also directly selling their products to the end customer. And so in this case, there's a classic case of disintermediation that is going on, that is being facilitated by these commerce platforms that a lot of big brands are creating in this space.
Panos?
Yeah, I think It's interesting. I mean, I agree with Robin that different countries will have a different approach to this. And one sector that I think is interesting is healthcare, of course, which is a sector that I know very well. I mean, if you take the example of China, you know, you have Ping An Insurance. It's a huge company, right? And recently, they started not only offering health insurance, but also offering a platform. They have this Ping An Good Doctor platform, which essentially matches doctors with patients. And of course, they have the health insurance company behind it. So they're able to insure their patients, whether it's public sector or private sector. So they do both, actually. So it's unbelievable how these companies, again, a huge company, is able to enter a space that we previously thought that was highly regulated, again, like thought to be a public utility, public good or a utility good, and it's being disrupted. And in the US, it's I think the recent COVID pandemic has accelerated this process. Amazon is everywhere. I mean, they have entered the pharmacy distribution network. So they have pretty much the network to disperse, pharmacies, pharmaceuticals. But at the same time, they're offering their own platforms to Amazon employees at different types of insurance. So I think, and I think what's key here is this idea of convenience. I think this is something that Michael Jacobidis mentioned yesterday in another panel, which I think is important to know, because because COVID has accelerated this process, we're now more in tune and more ready to accept the fact that, oh yes, please serve me with your services, because it's easier for me to do so. It's easier for me to see a doctor online because I'm so busy. I don't want to go and see a doctor face to face because I don't want to catch anything. So if it's for things that are not serious, I'd rather do it through a platform. And I'd rather have my pharmaceuticals delivered to me as opposed to going to pharmacy to get those. So I think, this idea of convenience, and when you have exactly these types of players that not only offer the digital tools to enable you to access services that you previously accessed physically, but also they have the logistics and distribution networks to do it. So it's a combination of both physical and digital that is disrupting this idea of what we think about as a public good. So I think the public sector will be disrupted, whether we like it or not. Of course, some services in the public sector, I agree with Carmelo, are very politicized and they're highly regulated. And that's where the problem of creating integrated, seamless services becomes a huge challenge. Because if you don't have seamless integration, you can't have digital platforms. You can't have platform ecosystems.
All right. Robin, did you have a comment on this further? All right. Okay, no. All right. So an interesting question from Sotiris about the breakdown. So citing that we see, for example, the Apple Epic legal dispute and the role of breakdowns and disruptions on platform relationships. So companies kind of battling for control or power or whatever you have it. So how important do you see such breakdowns in the field?
I mean, I think it's I can have a go at that. I think it's an incredibly interesting and high-profile case, and Epic has very carefully orchestrated their attack on Apple. Right? It was completely premeditated. They anticipated Apple's response, and also the timing of the attack is quite perfect, I would say. Right? Apple is facing increasing scrutiny from multiple antitrust policymakers and whatnot, and so it's very nicely and carefully done. And I would also say that it's probably one of the few complementers in such an ecosystem that can engage in such a battle, right? They don't have to respond to shareholders because they're still a private company, but they are one of the largest game developers or most successful game developers in the iOS ecosystem. So they're the perfect company to take on this battle. And still, I think that they're facing quite a hard time. I think we should also see it from the perspective of Epic having its own platform ecosystem that they would like to have as part of Android or as part of iOS. And so I think that there is ancillary motivations for engaging in this battle that are not necessarily just related to this particular dispute of whether or not being able to offer payments options that go outside of Apple's payment system. But in the end, I think what it will likely do, it will add to the scrutiny that Apple and other big tech companies are facing at the moment. And in the grand scheme of things, it might weaken Apple's bargaining power vis-a-vis complementers. And I think if that happens, Epic has been successful in its case.
Do other panelists have views on either the Epic Apple case or more generally about power struggles within the platforms? Carmelo?
Yeah, I do. I'm very skeptical about this case, and I don't see what's the point, of Epic to fight this hard, a losing battle. If I were an investor, I will run and buy now some stocks from Apple, because it's probably going to be the only winner of the big there from this, attack from antitrust authorities, because of a single point. I mean, so all of this needs to be defended on the ground of competition, right? And Apple is not the big guy in the room. What's the market shares of Apple compared to Android when it comes, to the underlying market, right? It's pretty low. So it's below 10% in some areas, and it gets to 14, 18% in some other markets. So, on the ground that of Epic saying, well, you are excluding myself from a market, and you're using your power to exclude me from the market, it's really a very shaky, battlefield, because Apple can say, I don't understand why you really want to go to a small market when you have Android there that controls more than 80% of the market, right? I mean, please go. You don't like, the way we are building value here, just go to Google, right? Now, the point is, why does Epic really want to sell its product in the Apple ecosystem? That is, I think, a more subtle but relevant question to ask. And my answer is that, well, bloody hell, because you make the money just on Apple ecosystem, not on Android. So the question is it in the rights of Apple to charge the hefty 30%, right, for Epic then to be able to make tons of money on the Apple ecosystem, or do we just want a standards to be run by Apple, right? Because I think that Apple created and control, right, the relationship and interactions, and in the parlance, according to what we're trying to do with panels, it's like it orchestrated the data in a way that now you can squeeze lots of value from the Apple ecosystem. So it's not keeping access to a market, but it's actually creating a very valuable market for Epic Games. So I think that the question we need to ask, a more general level, is, do we want to break this sort of power, right? Do we want to break this sort of power? There are side effects, so I'm not saying that everything is good and is nice, but if we break this ability of Apple to do something different from Google, well, we're gonna see now more of the like, right? More of the same. So at that point, we might be happy to have all the standards, but I don't think that we should go on that, right, and say it is fair or it is not fair. We need to understand what is competitive, distortive or not. And I don't think that Apple is distorting competition. I think that Apple is bringing more competition by building a different distinctive identity compared to the Google ecosystem. And is doing that by creating lots more value options for the complementors.
Robin.
I think these points have been really valuable to go on with the discussion about this case. I think the only thing I want to add is probably that, I mean, the question is really about the boundary resources here that kind of Apple is providing with regards to the different kinds of you know, for example, here the developer programmer license, for example, and what is fair use and what is fair way of using it, and who has right and so forth. So I think these kind of debates are needed. It's about about these open source type of license agreements and agreements on operating on platforms that we are discussing currently. And there is, I think, necessity to rethink, and think carefully about what is property versus what is not property in terms of the software here. And I find it just fascinating, this case. So just wanted to say that it's a broader question overall. Thank you.
Yep. So there is a question from Dimaria about the future trends on platforms. So what do you see as the future trends more broadly, like let's say the Internet of Things and how the relationship with value adding in platforms? Anybody have views on where this is going in these terms? Panos?
Yeah, I have some ideas. I think with 5G coming in, what's interesting is that with 5G you have the ability to now split the same infrastructure into different layers and then serve different groups of users under the same infrastructure. So what this creates is essentially vertical markets, right? So the 5G infrastructure could act as a platform in the way that we define platforms, in the sense that the internet service providers would become essentially platform owners, splitting their infrastructure for different players, and then allowing those different players to deliver services depending on specific user needs by reconfiguring the infrastructure accordingly. So the 5G is interesting because you can configure it to allow for higher speeds or higher higher size of data being exchanged, and so on. So there are different this idea of network slicing, which is at the core of 5G, I think is quite interesting. And this is where I think we would start to see the internet service providers, so British Telecommunications, AT&T, Virgin, etc., becoming platforms themselves. Now, the big question, of course, there is this idea of net neutrality, right? That has been around for ages, because that's where you're going to have, exactly because of this idea of demand and supply, you're going to have this selective promotion again of those players that get most of the bandwidth or most of the attention of the ISP. So if you have Netflix, for instance, right? Currently, Netflix is monopolizing the bandwidth in neighborhoods. I mean, the other day I couldn't get on because there were so many people on Netflix I couldn't watch anything. So what's interesting is that when you have Netflix monopolizing the bandwidth, the ISP, exactly because it's creating more value, it's going to selectively promote Netflix, which leaves out the rest of the players, right? So essentially you have the same kind of story as we are discussing now. You have monopoly for specific types of players that have the capabilities and the value creation, not just the digital capabilities, but the value creation capabilities to attract a higher user base. So this is exactly what, Carmelo was saying earlier, Epic is going to lose because exactly Apple is, is creating a specific type of value that is attracting those users that Epic wants to attract. So Epic has to play along, right? And it's the same. I think we're going to see a similar type of story with 5G networks.
Right. Next, do other panelists have views on the future? In this regard, okay. Yep. Further questions on the panelists, either in the chat or raising hands? All right.
Juha, I think there is a question in the chat. I don't know if
I think I've gone through all of the questions in the chat already. One thing that kind of like both Robin and Panos's presentations kind of raised the question in that what kind of regulation do you think is either needed or expected to emerge in the near future? Because you both kind of highlighted the need for further regulation. So can you kind of elaborate on that?
Robin, please.
Good luck.
Yeah, like I said, thank you. So one thing that I think the 5G, as discussed here, with regards to Internet of Things, is an interesting kind of case in itself, because we are talking about teleoperators, and teleoperators. So you are handed the right to operate the telenetwork. So in a similar way, we are probably, I think, going to see, or we should see, more of these data operators or operators within platform space who are given the rights to, for example, operate educational data or operate healthcare data, because then we could be more able to control the usage or the principles and encryption, for example, of usage of that kind of data. And I think there is one way to go forward in developing the platform economy in different kinds of settings where there are different requirements with regards to data operation, with regards to, think of, for example, manufacturing industry, or compared to healthcare sector, or compared to mobility, or compared to education. I mean, there are different. We might need data operators here to level kind of the competitive game here.
All right. Does Panos or somebody else have other perspectives on this?
Well, I am hesitant because regulation is such a big issue, and I don't think there is an easy answer. And I think, Carmelo made a point earlier that whatever lawsuits come out of a platform war always has to be debated or won or lost over competition, right? So the idea is to show that by the practices that a platform follows, it monopolizes competition, which is very difficult to show, right? That you monopolize competition, right? And I think this is where a lot of the battles just fall through the cracks, because it's not easy. And I think a lot of economists, like Marshall, for instance, Marshall van Alstyne, will say that breaking up platforms is a bad idea, because by breaking them up, you essentially break the scale of the platform, and by breaking the scale, by consequence, then you break the value co-creation. So so the idea of breaking platforms is not a good idea. The idea of regulating platforms in a different way, which I think Jeff was trying to get into yesterday, Jeffrey Parker in another panel, was that perhaps there is a way of monitoring the transactions that take place within the platform by trying to implement governance rules within the different players. But again, I think it's not easy, right? I mean, because in a multi-sided platform, you know, there's so many different transactions with so many different parties that it's very difficult to define specific rules that would apply in one case, but not in another, right? Because you don't want to be creating unfair competition in your effort to implement governance to enable specific types of transactions. So there's always a trade-off. And I guess the trade-off is at the level of not hurting the scale that takes place, and therefore the value co-creation, in order to be fair to a specific transaction between two parties. So I think that's the challenge, at least the way I understand it. It's not. I don't think it's an easy way to address this.
Charles has something on this point. Can we give? Can you turn on your mic, Charles? You can come in on this point if you want to have a.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not really an expert, but it seems a lot of what the discussion is about is the openness of the data and trying to get hold of the data. And it seems to me in the era of AI and machine learning, the data is a very amorphous object. And we need to get more understanding of the capabilities of the programs to manage the data, the whole systems to manage the data. And I think what Jeff was getting at was regulating not the data interfaces so much as regulating the capabilities and competences to manage that. Now, I don't pretend to understand what Jeff was saying, and I'm not really up high enough in that level of understanding, but might you amplify a little bit, please, on this question of whether focusing on the data and the data interfaces is enough, and whether the underlying knowledge of structures and capabilities of the operating systems of the various platforms isn't something that we need to get ourselves involved in. Thank you.
So
yes, I can go with this.
Yeah.
So thanks, Charles. I mean, I'm not surprised that I'm on the same lines here of thinking as you are. So in fact, I mean, the concern. I think that there are two concerns here that conflates every time into the debate. And so one is with the competition effects of data, and the other one is with the misuse of data for other societal issues, including privacy and etc. Both will take us, in fact, not to the access but to the control of data. So who gets control on it, and what do you do with the data? Now, on what you do with the data, we have a problem, I think. And the problem is the following, the way I see, and I come to slightly understand it. Now, the problem is that eventually we would like to have an ex ante, right, clear, standardized rule, otherwise it's not a rule, that applies to every single case, right? And will basically bind the platforms operators, right, to some specific practice or behavior. Now, if we do this, what are we gonna get? Now, I'm not gonna get into specific practice or whatever, but just speaking hypothetically, right? If we do this and we impose one way of managing the data, or restricting, what you could do and what you cannot do with the data, we're essentially going to impose a standardizations in terms of the infrastructures that power all the productions and delivery of this service. In other words, I'm truly concerned that what we're going to have competition within a given standard, and the standard will be de facto dictated by the rule that is going to be imposed onto the way that data needs to be handled. So in other words, if you decided that you cannot use data to exclude some complementors versus others, or to direct the steering some of the transactions in one direction rather than the other, what we're going to have is that everybody is going to handle along the same way, and therefore we're going to have not anymore Google versus Apple that they handle differently, but we're going to have Google and Apple abiding to the rules that are dictated by, the regulation. So they're going to do roughly the same, the same thing. So we're going to have competition within standards rather than having competition, between standards, between alternative ways of handling it. And this is, what I think is the dilemma that is there, why this is really so difficult to get it right. Because, if we go on, prevented the negative side effect of this, we would like to have it, fixed, very clear ex-ante rules. Now that can get, rid of between platform competition and just solidify what we have so far. If instead we want to have platform competition, so stimulate, alternative modes of organizing this, then we need to allow, the platforms to do different things and orchestrate the data in a different way. Then the side effect will be that, well, but then we can have, some of the negative consequences of this, that Apple will have, over control over the things, and we gonna, think that this is unfair, right? So I think that we need to strike some balance here. And we need to, there are clear trade-off. And I think that the very first idea here will be to converge at the societal level, or at least, European, US level, and understand what is really that we want to promote. We want to promote alternative ways of organizing, services and activities, and we need to accept some of the cost. Fine. Or do we want to protect, small companies and, against them fair practice and just establish and converge on one single standard. And therefore we say, whoever is going to run the standards, we don't care. We care what's happening inside the standard.
Right. Thank you, Carmelo. And I think we'll have to continue this in other forums and in future events. And I'm sure there's a lot to discuss on platforms and standards and ecosystems, but our time is up and we'll have about 10-minute break, and I hope you all come back for the next panel on artificial intelligence. But again, a big thank you to all the panelists and also to the audience for great questions and great discussion. And I hope to see you all in 10 minutes, but now we'll have a quick break and I'll stop the recording for a bit.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.